Okay, hi, I'm Andrea. This is my mom. Yeah. Okay, so where did our family come from?
On my side of the family comes from, interestingly, two different varied places. My mom's family came from Italy, and my father's family came from parts of Russia that have changed borders so many times. We're not really sure where it is.
It's interesting. How do you know where this information?
Well, my dad, growing up, he would always say, we were white Russians, and that would be Belarus. Or he would say that his family grew up in the same town as Stalin did, which is in the Georgia part of Russia. Two very different places. And sometimes my dad talked about the Ukraine, so it was really hard because we didn't really have a good story on that. But my family joined Ancestry.com, and a while ago, my brother Michael, number four out of my five brothers, he had a DNA sample, and it comes back that it would fit into the area of Belarus.
Why did he decide to get a DNA sample in the first place?
Well, my brother Michael is married to a woman named Olga from St. Petersburg. And so it's always good to check those things. And so they were just interested in knowing if their lines had crossed.
Got it. How many generations can you trace back from your parents?
Okay, well, my dad's, we can really only go back 2 generations. My dad's dad came from, that's the one that came from Belarus or Georgia or Ukraine. But that's all that we can trace back for him. He was born, when was he born? In 1883. And he came to the United States 2 years before the Russian Revolution. When was that? Shoot. My sister was telling me he came in 1910. And he came over because they were poor. When my grandfather came over, he went right to Ellenville, New York, and in fact there's consensus records that they found. They took a consensus a month after my grandfather came here, and he already had a job and was listed as a farm laborer. So knowing that he was one of those peasants in Russia during that whole time, that was they just weren't surviving. They didn't have enough food. It was not very good for them politically. And 2 years after he came is when the peasants had the revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution. So he grew up during all of that. My dad's mother came from Czechoslovakia, and they came over she was born 1887, and she came over in 1901. Czechoslovakia during that time also had a lot of hard times going on. There was always war going on from the 1800s on. And the borders of Czechoslovakia, which no longer exist, the borders of Czechoslovakia, sometimes it was Hungary, sometimes it was Austria. So locating exactly where they're from, the only reason why we know is because on Ancestry.com they have passenger lists from the passenger ships, the freighters that they came over on. There's a passenger list, and they ask questions: where are you coming from, where are you going to? And so that's what we know. They came from a town called Gerstadt. Could be Jarstab, could be Ger. Things get Americanized. So that's what we know about her. They also had a really hard time. My grandmother came over because her older sisters were already here. And the older sisters started coming over when their mother died.
Okay.
And so can really only go back 2 generations from there. It was just a really difficult time. It's hard to get specifics, right? And you know, my father's has passed away a very long time ago, and I never knew his mother or his father. So his parents had already died by the time I was born. So these are things we have to like dig deep for, but we're always trying.
Do you know anything else about your mother's side?
Yeah, my mother's family grew up. It's from a little town, Marolo, Italy, and it's a very small town. In fact, it's near Rome. It's just north of Rome. There's apparently 2 towns called Marolo. There's one that's more of a booming metropolis, but this one is so small, everybody's related to each other. Marolo, my grandfather came over when he was 17.
Wow.
And
Why did he come over?
he came over to hear he was a very, very bad man. When
he was 17?
No, I'm sorry, he wasn't a very bad man. His father, my grandfather's father, was not a nice man. And from everything we've heard, he used to beat his children. He beat his wife a lot. So my grandfather actually left home a year and a half before. So he's 15 and a half, got into a big argument, left home, saved up his money, and then came on over. And when he came over, there were 9 other people from this very small village of Marolo who came over with him. And we're starting to find out that some of them, well, probably the whole town is related to each other, the whole village. But we're starting to find out that there are more people out there that we have closer relations to than we knew that we did. But my mother and my sister.
Wait, so when he was 17, he came over to America alone, basically?
Basically, he came over alone. I mean, there were people with him that were related, but they got off the boat in Boston, and he went right to Utica, New York.
Oh, he went to Utica. Got it.
Yeah, Utica, New York at that time, where my mother and my father were both living when they met each other. Utica, New York was like the gateway to the West. It was the town. It was the big place. So.
Around what year was that? Do you know?
My grandfather was born in 1898, and he came over in 1915.
Got it. Wow. Do you know anything past that, like before your great-grandfather?
When we were there, the family basically from the beginning of time lived in Italy. From that, generations upon generations all lived in Marolo, Italy. So those would be the roots. And we do know like a lot of names. Personally, I don't. We have access to records that show us a whole lot more.
Was it always the Marolo, Italy, or was it scattered throughout the
Nope,
country?
it was always Marolo. Always that little hillside town north of Rome.
Do we have any veterans in our family?
We actually do. My father was a veteran.
Oh, I didn't know that.
My father served in World War II. He was drafted
Okay.
into World War II.
How old was he?
He was 18.
Okay, so he was 18 when he was drafted to World War II. Okay.
Yep, he was drafted. It's funny, if you go to Ancestry.com, it says he's got 4 years of high school, but my father never got a high school diploma. When my father was 35, when he married my mom, he got his GED. And then from there, he was working at an air base, and he got back when computers were the size of a wall and they had moved them all in. My dad was just working as just this low-level guy, and everybody had gone out to lunch. So my dad's, very, curious, starts checking things. all the engineers come back and they're like, oh my gosh, Frank, what did you do? Oh, it's working, because they were trying all morning to get it working. It turned out that my father actually plugged it in. And from there, they said, hey, this guy's got potential. So my dad actually got a degree in engineering from Syracuse University. So, but my father did serve. Let's go back to the question. He did serve in the military, during the war. He served as an infantry person, radio person over in England during the war. And he was showing us some pictures at one point, and my sister was like, oh, this guy looks familiar. Do we know him? And he's like, well, no, we don't. This was one of my friends, and he died while we were over there. So that's interesting, because they didn't want whole generations wiped out. They wanted a family name to be able to continue. So they wouldn't let my Uncle Willie join the Army, but he joined the Merchant Marines.
Okay.
And the Merchant Marines, they're like a private company out on the waters. What they did is they transported all the goods and all the equipment and everything that they needed for war. They did a lot of the transportation. Mm-hmm. Now, he worked a lot in the Pacific arena, whereas my dad was in the European arena of World War II. But he went from New York to Aruba, through the Panama Canal, all the way to Manila in the Philippines, delivering things. And the thing was, that was a more dangerous job. Because what are you going to attack? You're going to bomb the unarmed ships, transporting all of the equipment you need and all of the like guns and ammunition, all of that stuff. Yeah. That's how it was transported. So, anyways.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me any stories about our family?
All right, so I told you about my grandfather's story. That's a pretty interesting story. Okay, a story that I know from pictures is that my grandfather was generally pretty successful. He worked for the railroad or whatever. However, he would always take any odd job he could get. So in the summer times, my mother, all her brothers and sisters, whole family would go out and live in like sharecroppers' houses, picking beans all summer long.
All summer?
All summer long. They had no plumbing, no electricity. They lived in these little like cabins on the property and pick beans. What I find interesting is that we actually have pictures of that, and I have seen pictures of my mom being small. My Uncle Robert, who was also a Marine, was really big into photography. After he got out, he started his own publishing company in Utica, New York. In fact, his sons still run it today. But he was always a novice photographer, taking pictures. Every single picture, they're in the cabin. They're standing outside the cabin in the middle of the beans. They're all smiling. They're all so very happy. No matter what job they did it as a group, and they considered themselves wealthy because they could get this extra money. My grandfather had a house on Hope Avenue in Utica, New York, and it was a really nice neighborhood. And I mean, so you come over when you're 17, you start working wherever, you work for the railroad for forever, you get you a house, you have 5 children. That's very successful. Well, when my mother was in college, and at that time women didn't go to college, but my mom went to college. When she was away, the family house burned down.
Oh, goodness.
And unfortunately, they had this elderly tenant who lived upstairs. She died during that fire. Not really sure why it started, or could have been any number of reasons. But from that time on, my grandfather would not own any more property because it took an emotional toll on him to feel like he was responsible, because he was the owner of the house. where it died, and I
What actually caused the fire?
we don't know. We
Okay.
don't know. It it could have just been hot. They didn't have air conditioning during that time. It could have been, early wiring. It could have been anything. But I found out that the house that my grandparents always lived in, the house that I always visited, actually belonged to the Russian side of the family. It belonged to my father. And my father rented it out to my grandparents. I didn't even realize that till very recently.
Wow. Do we have any genealogical records?
We do. On Ancestry.com. my, from my sister is a member, and she has gone and gotten all of that information.
What made her want to do that in the first place?
So my sister Frankie is the oldest of us 9 children. I'm number 8. Frankie's number 1. Frankie had more time with grandparents than I did. My grandparents died when I was very young. So Frankie and I are about 11, 12 years apart. So she's had more time, exposure to. I have a very old family, so she has more exposure to talking with them, talking with my mother, talking with my father. My father died when I was in my early 20s. So because she's had that, she's always been very interested. So she helps keep the pieces together.
Well, thank you so much.
Alrighty.
That's it.
Yep, bye-bye.
Okay.